Okay, it is 102. Um, I want to thank everybody for coming to our every third
Oh, it
Friday
certainly is.
McLean County Reentry Council meeting. We're glad you're here. Even showing up a few days before Christmas. Mostly sometime a few days before Christmas, people check out, people don't show up. So I appreciate everyone for showing up today, for coming out. My name is Toy Beasley, and I am the McLean County Reentry president. And I also work for an organization called the Illinois Coalition to End Permanent Punishment. I'm the Central Illinois Community Organizer for that graduate organization. So glad to be here today. So what we're going to do is we're going to go around and do introductions. And so I want everybody to tell who they are, what org they work for, and what is your favorite Christmas song. All right. So that being said, I'm gonna go ahead and start with Elise.
Somehow I knew.
Good to
My
see you
voice is
back.
really bad, but my name is Elise, and I am the District 3. Let me fix that. I have a dog in here. I am the Corrections Reentry Assessment Specialist for Decatur, Bloomington area, and I help people who are on parole. Um, I don't have a favorite Christmas song. I'm sorry.
That's fine. That's fine. Thank you for coming. Samantha?
Hello, I'm Samantha. I'm the Assistant Director for McLean County's Behavioral Health Coordination. My favorite Christmas song is probably a sad one. It's Christmas Shoes. I don't know who it's by, probably a lot of people, but there's also a movie about it. Very nostalgic, very vintage for me. So,
That is a very sad
Awesome.
one, but it is a really, really good one. I know it's a country
mhm.
singer is the one that I've heard, but
Mm.
Dr. Conley.
Hi, I'm Chris Conley. I teach at Illinois Wesleyan. My favorite Christmas song is In the Bleak Midwinter.
Okay. Adam.
Sorry, I'm eating lunch. Adam
Oh,
Lovell
you
with
good.
the Salvation Army of Bloomington. And my favorite Christmas song, a little bit obscure. It's called Beautiful Star of Bethlehem, the bluegrass versions like Ralph Stanley and the Clinch Mountain Boys. That's my favorite.
mhm.
Awesome. Awesome. Zach.
Hi, my name is Zach McCall. I work as an admission coordinator at Heartland Community College, and I do community outreach. And my favorite Christmas song is "Sweet Gingerbread Man" by Sammy Davis Jr.
Awesome. Danielle.
Hi, my name is Danielle. I am the Southern Region Reentry Coordinator for Oxford House, and I'm also the outreach worker for McLean County. Um, I'm childish. My favorite Christmas song is Jingle Bells.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Grant.
Hi, everybody. My name is Grant Chassie. I'm the new district coordinator for Representative Sharon Chung in the 91st District. And my favorite Christmas song is Last Christmas by Wham.
Awesome.
Oh,
Kara.
Hi, my name is Kara Powell. I am the reentry case manager at the McLean County Jail. I feel like every few years my favorite songs change, but currently I really like, I think it's just called Christmas by Darlene Love.
Awesome. Awesome. Millicent.
Hi, I'm Millicent. I am a corrections assessment specialist for Illinois Department of Corrections. And I'd have to say my favorite Christmas song is probably Little Drummer Boy.
Awesome. Awesome. Miss Tasha Davis.
Sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to unmute. Hello, everyone. I am Tasha Davis. I'm with Family Community Resource Center. I'm the program coordinator I also do outreach services, and there's so many Christmas songs I like. I think my favorite one of all times is "I Want a Hippopotamus for Christmas." It's one of my favorites.
You stole that from me.
Jim.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jim Simeone from Illinois Wesleyan University. We're working on a project at Lawrence Correctional Center right now with the students doing a reading group. And my favorite Christmas song is Go Tell It on the Mountain with Mahalia Jackson.
All right. Welcome, Jim. Finally get to meet you. Langston.
Hi guys, I'm Langston from the McLean County Reentry Council, and my favorite Christmas song, Dreaming of a Whisper.
You're breaking up really bad.
Sorry, I'm on
That
the
that
highway. I'm
that's
not
fine.
driving.
Welcome, Langston.
Thank you guys.
Last but not least, I'm gonna turn it over to our guest speaker, Dr. Charles Bell. He's from the Illinois State University, associate professor with the Criminal Justice Department. I'm gonna have him introduce himself and tell you guys a little bit about him before he starts and his favorite Christmas song, if he has one. Go ahead,
Okay.
Dr. Bell.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here today. Favorite Christmas song is Mariah Carey's All I Want for Christmas. That's a hallmark in my family, so really love that one. Um, Happy to be here today. I am a school punishment scholar. I'm originally from Detroit. I've been living in Bloomington for about almost 8 years now. I'm teaching at Illinois State. Really love it. Having a lot of fun and doing a lot of good work. Um, my research agenda started in Michigan, has expanded throughout the Midwest, and has now become national at this point on school suspensions, seclusion, restraints, and things of that nature. So I have a presentation prepared. And I know that you're really interested in understanding the origins of the school to prison pipeline, how it manifests and how it's working today in our society. So I would like to share my screen. Let's see. And nope, that's the wrong one. It's this one. Share. All right, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. No, it's not in slideshow. Let's see. Is the screen you're seeing in full presentation mode?
Yes, I think so. Yes.
Okay,
Yep,
perfect.
it is.
Okay. So when we talk about the school to prison pipeline, I think it's important to understand where it actually starts. And as I've become a researcher over the years, I started researching the school to prison pipeline about 15 years ago. And it was this very vague term that described this incidental observation that many people were observing in our society. These students are starting in school, and through some mechanism, they're ending up in prison. At that point, many people didn't know how this was happening. There was not a lot of qualitative research on this. They were looking at the numbers specifically from the U.S. Department of Education, the Office of Civil Rights report, and they're seeing statistics. And we'll show those statistics, but I think it's really important just to understand how this occurs. So some of this presentation will be some statistics, some of it will be qualitative, largely qualitative, but there's also a very important historical context that's important here today. So I'll start by saying that one of the earliest sort of understandings of the origins of the school to prison pipeline, there's two things that you have to understand. First, resisting school desegregation. This is a problem that has two intersecting points. The first point is resisting school desegregation. So, although Brown v. Board of Education, 1954, this court decision mandated school desegregation, it's important to understand that many school districts resisted this all the way into the late 1960s and early 1970s. And Aaron Kupchik's recent book on school punishment, it shows that schools that engaged in the highest level of resistance to school desegregation, particularly in the 1960s and early 1970s, now they have the highest levels of school suspensions. So that's a history that's really important to understanding why some of these districts are continuing to have high suspension numbers, even in the face of school discipline reform laws. This is a long history that dates all the way back 50, 60 years. And as one administrator told me, school suspensions work great for us. And until there's a legislative bill that punishes us for violating whatever school discipline reform laws you've proposed, we're going to continue doing it. So this is a culture, a deeply rooted culture of exclusion that is manifested in school districts and traces over 50, 60 years. Now, in addition to this, and the school to prison pipeline as we know it, metal detectors, guns in schools, suspensions, this is owed to the war on drugs because we see the war on drugs and we know it as a decision that starts in 1973 in New York with Governor Nelson Rockefeller to criminalize drug use rather than refer people to medical treatment. Then it expands into the federal government with the Anti-Drug Abuse Acts of 1986 and 1988. And we know what those policies did. They created a lot of mass incarceration, mainly Black, brown individuals, poor individuals in our society. So it should be no surprise that when you implement mandatory minimum punishments in our education system, you would also see very similar effects in our schools. So it's important to understand that school desegregation policies and mandatory minimum punishments are creating this framework on the school to prison pipeline as we know it. Now, how does this occur? 1994, the Gun-Free Schools Act authorizes the use of zero tolerance policies via the Gun-Free Schools Act, and it mandates a 1 year expulsion, which sounds important. Great. We do not want weapons in our schools. This is a problem we're dealing with right now. I'm on the National Center for School Safety, and we're dealing with this challenge as we see it right now. The problem, what literally creates the infrastructure of the school to prison pipeline as we know it, is several states actually went beyond the scope of the Gun-Free Schools Act, took those provisions, the mandatory punishment provisions, and they applied it to things that were never intended to be punished. Dress code violations, chewing gum, students' hair, things that many students feel that are a part of themselves. I'm here to learn. Why are you looking at my hair? From what a lot of students have told me. So criminalizing things that were never intended to be criminalized when they implemented the Gun-Free Schools Act, expanding that throughout many states, and it kicked off a national competition to see who can be the toughest on school punishment, which is very similar to exactly what happened in the war on drugs and mandatory minimums, who could be the toughest on crime. So you also see the mandatory use of metal detectors and guards, starting with Columbine High School shooting and just going in a very dangerous direction where you see metal detectors, guards, law enforcement officers, barbed wire around schools in some districts, particularly where I grew up in Detroit. So it starts to look a lot like prison and it starts to feel a lot like prison. And the students, I have some quotes from the interviews that I've conducted, they'll tell you this. So what do we know about school suspensions? Well, the Civil Rights Data Collection Report found that Black girls were suspended at about 6 times the rates of their white counterparts. Black boys are about 3.8 times. And nationally, we see, and this is pretty much in every year, these numbers change very little, except in COVID years. And the problem with COVID years, if you ever see any data from the COVID years, I believe that it was about 15%. Black students made up about 15% of the school age population, and about 21 to 22% of students who were suspended. Those numbers are misleading. And they're misleading because, of course, students weren't in schools, but they were being kicked out of virtual schools. And there are no data sets that actually track suspensions in virtual schools. I have people that are literally begging me to go in that direction next, and I'm looking into that as well. But there's no data on like virtual kickouts nationally. We know that school suspensions are associated with school dropouts, academic failure, and incarceration. So that's what literally builds the school to prison pipeline as we know it. But how do we get there? I want to show you some examples of the actual pipeline in its making. So what I did was I started in Michigan, interviewing students, expanded throughout Illinois, and has since went national, particularly in the South, most recently, interviewing advocates and parents and students who've been suspended. And I've asked students about 45 to 50 semi-structured interview questions on how the school suspensions impacted their grades, their social status, their relationships with educators, parents' employment, because students are not the only ones that are impacted by these suspensions, which is very important to understand. And as we build up on the school to prison pipeline, it really paints a very disturbing picture of our schools and the intentionality in the pipeline. I was also really interested in understanding their perceptions of metal detectors, guards, and law enforcement officers as students drew connections between, is this normal for you? How do you feel about it? Are you avoiding school because of this? I think those are really important issues to really think about. What I found is that nearly all the students and parents I interviewed suggested that suspensions were unfair, and that feeling is what pushed them out of school and led them to withdraw emotionally. So they found that punishments were excessive with respect to the conduct violation. School officials marginalized Black students and parents' voices and denied them the opportunity to explain themselves in the disciplinary process. School suspensions harm students' grades. Parents literally lost their jobs because of school suspensions, and schools failed to protect Black students and punish them for protecting themselves. And I should say that this is largely on Black students because they are suspended at the highest rates and overrepresented in school suspensions in the school to prison pipeline. Latino students are suspended at their sort of representation in schools and under, depending on geographic location. Most of the issues that are targeting Latino students are in the southwest of the country, and in many pocket areas throughout the Midwest as well. So it's not a national issue. It's geographically located. And finally, many parents looked at this system. They're looking at a system that was removing their children from school. They knew their children had to be in school. And when you're living in areas where there is constant gunfire and constant fights for survival, there's no greater understanding of I need to be in school, because school becomes more than just education. It becomes your only escape. It becomes, if I don't get education, I may not make it out of here alive. And that's what many kids are actually facing. And that's what creates the frustration of the suspension. The suspension is no longer just this school punishment. It's literally standing in the face of my life. And when one of the challenges and one of the things that I talk to educators about is when we send children home at a time when their parents are not there, we have to be mindful of what we're sending them home to. Because if they're living in a gang violent area, many children are waking up and school may be the only safe place they know. And when you suspend a kid because they have the wrong color shirt on, which has happened. I had a student in my book that had a 39-day suspension because he came to school in the wrong color shirt. What are we sending these students back to? Gang violence, shootings. Some kids come to school because that's where they eat breakfast and lunch. Well, if I have no food at home and you're sending me home with this suspension, where do I eat? So a lot of kids, they get their first introduction to the criminal justice system because they're hungry, and they go and they take a bag of chips at the corner store, a muffin at the corner store, and you get arrested because of that. You're hungry, you don't know what to do, and those
Hey,
kind of unfortunate situations.
I'm looking at it kind of right now. I'm just trying.
Go ahead, I mute her.
Oh, no problem. So I want to show you an example here. And one of the first myths of the school to prison pipeline is that when a student receives a suspension, they're automatically guilty. When a student says, I've been suspended, there's an automatic assumption of what did you do? Because you must have done something to earn this. And I want to immediately debunk this myth because it's important to understand that some students didn't do anything at all. They were suspended wrongfully because someone misinterpreted their actions. So Willie is a ninth grade student. He says he got suspended because I was skipping in the halls and I didn't want to go to lunch because every time it was a fight and they held the kids in there for a couple of hours. So me and like a couple of people snuck out. We was actually standing outside of our teacher's class, but they took it as skipping, so I say skipping. They said I wasn't supposed to walk out the lunchroom. Now let's examine this. Willie's in the lunchroom. There's fights in the lunchroom. He does not get involved in the fight, take sides. He doesn't pull out his camera phone and yell World Star or anything like that. He removes himself from the situation. I don't want to be involved. The safest place I know is to stand outside of my teacher's class and wait for class to start. Someone in the hallway, an administrator, sees Willie and says, "You're skipping. You're suspended. You're gone. I don't want to hear anything from you. Take this slip. Bye." And how do I know that? He says, they should have just let us talk because they didn't let us say nothing. They just suspended us. They didn't let us tell the story or nothing. Maybe if they let us tell the story, I wouldn't have gotten suspended. He wasn't able to talk, tell his side of the story, anything. He was just told to leave. Now, we've all been in high school. We've all been kids. Not many kids are skipping lunch. That's somewhere where they like to be. They like to talk, have fun. Most people are not skipping lunch. But again, he was suspended because of this. Now, there's a even deeper story here within Willie's narrative. In the yellow, as I've highlighted, he says we was actually standing outside of our teacher's class, but they took it as skipping, so I just say skipping. Willie's telling us that I know I wasn't skipping, but there's a power dynamic in this institution because I'm a kid. We've seen this play out in the Central Park 5 case. I'm a kid. But when you put children in rooms with adults and they're saying, "Willie, you were skipping, you're skipping, you're skipping," what Willie's saying is that, I'm a kid. Okay, I'm skipping. And we know that children are impressionable. They can be made to say things that are not true. So Willie says, "Hey, I'm skipping. I'll just take this." And you're right. But in actuality, what Willie is saying is, who stands up for me? Where is the neutral person that actually makes sure my voice is heard in this process? Because the entire school bureaucracy just mobilized against me based on the accusation made by one person. There was no investigation. There's no look into what happened. There was no interviewing. You're gone, suspended. Bye. And there's no regard for what we're sending Willie into. And he got suspended 3 days. Now, on the surface, many people would think, well, it's just 3 days. But as we see in many other interviews, which you'll see in a few slides, students who miss one day of school, that could be a test day. And I'll go into this. So Willie's case shows us that just being suspended unfairly, a lot of students don't want to come back after that. That's a devastating psychological betrayal. When children enter school, they look at adults. They've been trained and taught to look at adults in schools. I can trust you. You have my back. You're supporting me. You're educating me. And for someone who you believe in to say, "You're doing this, I wasn't doing it." No, you were doing it. And suspending you, kicking you out of school for it. You have to go home and you have to tell your mom, "I got suspended for something I didn't do." Many of these kids are in tears. And they never want to go back to school again. And what happens to a kid who never goes back to school? Well, now you're in the street. And you get arrested and incarcerated. So that's just one pathway. Now, we know that frequent out-of-school suspension has a negative impact on suspended and non-suspended students. Because if the teacher is suspending kids, they're not teaching. So everyone in the class suffers. We also know that there is a racial imbalance here where suspensions are responsible for as much as 1/5 of the black-white achievement gap. Because if you're suspending students in such high numbers, they're not in school, they're not learning. But how does suspension harm achievement? This is a qualitative question that the research had not answered yet until I did my study. And what I found is three pathways. One is just missing high point value assignments and having difficulty catching up. So students like Jerome says, yeah, I had a B in the class. Next thing you know, it's an F. He got a 1 day suspension because he was late to class, and it just happened to be an exam day. Now he has a 0 for his exam and he has an F in the class. Well, if you fail a class, and in many cases, if you fail an exam, it's really hard to catch up. You don't get to make up the exam because you were suspended. So you're going to spend the rest of the semester climbing out of that hole. Well, a lot of kids are so embarrassed because they know they're behind. And what happens if you have to repeat that class? They don't come back through the embarrassment and the shame. And if you're not in school, where are you? You're in the street. That's a question. I've worked with the Center for Disease Control on school discipline issues, and that's a public health nightmare. If students are not in school, where are they? And I know because as I was doing my study, I was actually in the neighborhoods looking to find ways to get into a lot of these schools, and I would see tons of kids. It's noon. Why aren't you in school? I'm suspended. They don't want me. I can't go back. And you would see this repeatedly throughout neighborhoods, throughout the entire state. I'm just looking at why are these kids in school? And they're terrified of going back because of the rejection and the shame that's associated with the suspensions. Now, this is one pathway, missing high point value assignments. Also, the second pathway is parents told me they couldn't compensate for the missed instruction. Your kid gets suspended on a Monday, they get a 5 day suspension, a 3 day suspension, but you're working full time. You can't just pick up a book and say, I'm going to jump into algebra 2, trigonometry. Most parents told me I can't do it. I don't know what this is. I'm busy managing our lives and making sure we have a roof over our head. But the most devastating pathway, overwhelmingly, this is what most people, parents, and students reported. They told me teachers using their discretion, educator resistance to providing students access to their makeup work. Many teachers looked at suspended students, formed negative perceptions of them based on the fact that they were suspended, and denied them access to their makeup work. As DeAndre says, depending on the teacher, some teachers be like, oh, you're suspended, all right, you don't care about school. That's the mentality some teachers would have. Now, put Willie in this situation. He got suspended for skipping lunch. That doesn't mean he doesn't care about school, but because of the suspension, he doesn't get access to his makeup work. And what happens if you don't get access to your makeup work? You fail. And if you fail, most kids never come back and they end up in the street. Kimberly says, my math teacher didn't like me, so he didn't give me any of my work, and I failed that class throughout the whole year. This raises really important questions. Should a teacher be able to deny access to makeup work because they don't like you or because of a suspension? In Georgia, they actually took this research based in this book that I wrote on suspended and these particular cases, and they passed a law denying this, making it illegal, because this is very harmful to children. Particularly when children are suspended, you don't know if they're innocent or guilty. The suspension is given out, you're told to go home, and then the investigation actually starts in many cases, when in reality, the investigation should start before the suspension is ever issued, so you don't miss makeup work. So a lot of students are missing makeup work for things they didn't even do. In DeAndre's case, his brother was being attacked at school. He intervened to stop it. He got a 5 day suspension because of a zero tolerance policy. Now, we talked about how school suspensions impact students, and we're going to keep going with this to some degree. But I want you to understand that it's not just students, it's parents as well. Put yourself in Vanessa's situation. Vanessa's son is in high school. He has attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. He's being targeted because of it, which is illegal. But they're doing it in this particular district. And she's getting a call that her son is getting suspended. She is very knowledgeable about the school to prison pipeline. She does not want her son to end up in this pipeline. He's having a rough time at school, she says. He's going to get suspended. She tells her boss, and her boss says, if you leave, don't come back. What do you do in that situation? You're stuck because your son is at risk of being suspended for something he cannot control, his disability status. And that's being criminalized against him. They're not interested in accommodations. They're not interested in help. They want him to leave at this point. And you're being punished by your employer for advocating for your kid. She says, I left, $37 an hour job. She was a single parent as well, too, which is important to consider. So this is something that's devastating for many parents as well. And on the flip side of this, Vanessa told me that she could not accept full-time employment. She was forced to accept part-time employment so she can spend most of her time at the school. So when we see parents that are highly engaged in the school, it looks great on the surface. But what we don't realize is that in many cases, it's actually a protective factor. It's parents inserting themselves into the school as a barrier between the school and their child. Because the school discipline process, as I've learned, privileges middle-class parents who can get to the school immediately when a suspension is issued, because at that point, the suspension can be negotiated. The length of it, its permanency, or you can eliminate it altogether if you're there to talk to the school administrators. But if you're working a 9 to 5, you can't get to the school. So now the suspension is permanent, longer, and the road to expulsion becomes quicker because of that. Also talk to students who are strip searched. Just imagine the devastation of being strip searched at school illegally. It's embarrassing. You never want to go back to school because of the shame and the stigma associated with it. Kimberly says, I went to this school, the metal detectors didn't work. So she had a phone in her pocket. They didn't realize it was actually a phone. They just saw a bulge. They made her go to the bathroom and take off everything, and they searched her without her parents' permission. This is illegal. The ACLU has sued several school districts because of this, and they keep doing it. Because in many cases, there's some schools, not all of them, but from what I can see after going into hundreds of schools at this point and talking to administrators, they know that policymakers are not watching. And they can get away with things if people don't complain. So many schools are like, I have legal representation on standby. What are you going to do? You're just one person, you're a parent. And unless you have the means to actually sue the school and win and force some sort of settlement agreement, you're in this very isolated place. That's really dangerous for a lot of parents. I've had a lot of parents tell me that they were fighting the schools in these kind of situations and losing, and it started impacting their mental health as well. So I want you to keep in mind the school to prison pipeline isn't just students alone. The parents are there with them, suffering through this in agony. And moving towards, I have a few more slides left. So I talked to a lot of students, and in the middle of our interviews, when I was asking these questions about academic achievement, I noticed they were doing this, and this really activated a lot of the psychology in my background. My bachelor's is in psychology, my master's is in school psychology, my doctorate is in sociology. So I'm very interdisciplinary in terms of criminal justice. But I noticed that a lot of these students were paranoid. They're looking over their shoulders throughout the interviews. I'm just thinking, are they concerned about something? Are they worried about something? So I learned, eventually I was able to unmask this defense mechanism that they were exhibiting. And they told me, I don't feel safe in school. You see metal detectors, guards, and law enforcement officers. And as adults, we think, oh, this school must be really safe. They have all the school safety measures in place. But what students told me is that they were very aware of what they call vulnerable spaces in the school. There's metal detectors at the front door. There's none at the back or the sides. And there may be cameras in the halls or in this particular classroom, but the school bathroom a notorious vulnerable space for students. Tragically, students have walked into school bathrooms and they didn't walk out. They got jumped, got into fights, and they died in those bathrooms. And it's tragic to even say that, to think of it, but it's happened so often that it is really telling that it's not on the radar of a lot of adults. So you have a lot of students who are not going to school because they're scared, number one, of being jumped. So in response to this, in response to the lack of safety, some students said, I'm going to create my own safety. And they realized that seeking suspensions and earning a reputation for violence deterred some attacks, but it also trapped them because you had this upper echelon of students who were gang oriented. They knew they were tough. And when they see you get a suspension for fighting, you've earned some toughness, some popularity and respect. Now they want to test your toughness. So now you're trapped. You deterred some violence here, but you also invited some violence from the top echelon of the school. So these students were getting into these fights, and we know that fighting is criminalized on school grounds. You get arrested and you get incarcerated, school to prison pipeline. So it's really important just to understand that. And I have two examples of this. Stephen, he says, I got into an altercation. I was about to get jumped. He's in a suburban high school. He says, I asked him how many students are going to jump him. He says about 10. It's boys and girls. When I came out of my class, they was waiting and they tried to surround me. My friends had to come help me. What's really interesting here is that Stephen doesn't say, I look for the guards. He doesn't say, I look for the teacher and say, teacher, help me. Stephen says he's already established friendships with people who are willing to fight with him to ensure group safety. I have friends that are willing to, if I get into a fight, they're fighting on my behalf with me to ensure group safety. And I talk to students like this, and it sounded a lot like a gang. And when we think of gang development, we think of it in the street. A lot of the interventions to de-escalate gang activity are situated in the streets or in prisons. But what if I told you that a lot of the social factors that contribute to gang alliances, students learning that they're not safe, actually begin in public schools? A lot of these students are actually showing up to public schools, and the first thing they're looking for are their friends. I see all of my friends. If anybody messes with me, I know I got my friends, they have my back. And if students are learning that they need alliances and they're being socialized into this, what if these alliances and these sort of gang-like alliances spill over into the street, would spill over into prisons? Because we have a prison code in the inmate code. We know about that. That literature's there. We have a street code. And what I'm arguing is that there's a code in public schools as well that's teaching students that there's safety in numbers, that being alone is problematic. And they're learning this. I asked Stephen, why didn't you just walk away? He says, I have to defend myself. I don't want to be picked on anymore because I didn't defend myself. And if you don't defend yourself, even at school, people will talk about you and you'll get targeted all the time because they think you're weak. And if you get into fights, zero tolerance policies in many districts, they suspend both people and they refer you to the criminal justice system. You get arrested in many schools. So if you don't even have to start the fight, you could be the victim, but there's no sort of investigation process to determine that in many districts. So that's important to hold on to. If you are attacked and you don't fight back, you get beat up, jumped, attacked more often, suspended, potentially even arrested. I talked to Angel. I was really interested because she had received a suspension for fighting. And I was wondering if receiving that suspension for fighting would deter her from fighting again in the future. She said, probably makes it more likely for me to fight because getting suspended, people feel like they want to test me or push my buttons, which that upper echelon, she's getting suspended for fighting. There's gang-oriented students in the school that see her fighting. Well, they're all fighting for the top dog status, that top dominant factor in the school, because that's the ultimate protective factor. Once you have that, nobody wants to mess with you. But anyone who's on their way to earning it is a threat to those at the top. So now they want to challenge you and fight you. And what I've learned, very similar to the street code, respect is very difficult to gain and easy to lose. You lose one fight, someone calls you a punk or anything weak, you have to challenge that. You have to defend it at all times. So a lot of these students, when I started this study, I expected them to have between 1 and 5 suspensions. Many of these students had 20 to 30 suspensions by the time they reached 9th and 10th grade because they were stuck in this cycle of violence. And the implications of it were so severe because many of these students were living in the same neighborhood that their peers that they went to school. So if you didn't fight at school, if you backed down, that meant you couldn't walk home. You couldn't catch the bus. You couldn't come outside. And because of phones and because of the internet and computers, cyberbullying, people were bullying you in your house. And we're losing kids to suicide because of this, and it goes unchecked, which is one of the reasons why the cell phone ban has gained so much traction, because teachers have argued that once a fight is recorded and posted online, it's beyond their control. So if you go on World Star, you go on Twitter, there's hundreds of fight videos from kids. And the problem is that video lives on forever. So it never comes down. So many children never avoid the stigma of the fight. So very similar to Elijah Anderson's code of the street theory, I argue that the code of the school, which is what I call this phenomenon, is rooted in the lack of protection students receive from school guards and their fear of victimization. Because we don't involve students in the process of creating school rules and school safety plans. So just reiterating that students who refused to defend themselves were perceived as weak, which invited subsequent attacks, which could be criminalized in referral to the justice system. Students who engaged in fights and earned suspensions discouraged some attacks, but some students viewed their willingness to fight as an indicator of toughness, which invited more attacks, which could land them to or be arrested and in the criminal justice system. So as you see, there are multiple school to prison pipelines in place because of how we're running our schools. And many parents, because of this, they're looking at the schools and they're realizing that this school is failing my kid. And if I don't do something immediately, my kid is not going to graduate. And if they don't get a high school diploma, they can't go to college. And with the cost of living and the violence that many children are facing in their own communities, they need a high school diploma. They need to be in higher education or the next step for themselves to earn some money. So school suspension is not just a punishment. It is literally harming and jeopardizing students' lives in many cases. And just to go a little bit further, if you're interested in reading more about this, this is the information I presented is in my book, Suspended. But I've gone beyond this at this point, and I wanted to present some slides I never presented before. There's just a few, just to give you an overview of this. Secondary discipline, because this really tells you a lot about schools and how they respond to advocacy. So school punishment scholars have found that suspension does not stop at the suspended student. I kind of mentioned this earlier. But some schools actually force parents of suspended students to attend night classes and parent orientations. And parents who worked found this insurmountable. I can't get there, which means my kid can't get back to school. And if they're out of school 10, 15 days down because I'm working, what I've learned is that a lot of these students are actually bonding with other students who've been suspended. They're bonding in the trauma of being suspended, which formulates gangs in the street. So that's another issue. I was really interested in understanding, how do schools respond when parents of Black children advocate for them throughout the school discipline process? And how do schools respond when community advocates advocate for Black children throughout the discipline process? So I interviewed parents mostly in the South. And what I found is that secondary discipline was just devastating for them. It included being physically escorted off school premises just for advocating for kids who were being suspended wrongfully. their rights were being violated. Schools didn't care. They escorted families and advocates off the premises, banned them from school grounds. Parents lost their jobs, advocates lost their jobs because the district was so small. People in the district were using their power to target other parents. And they actually sent some people to their homes to threaten them, which I found unbelievable until I actually saw video evidence from a Ring camera of people threatening parents for actually advocating for their children. And then I found, and this is the last line, children also reported feelings of being targeted for suspension after the advocacy process. So they were suspended for something, their parent or advocate came to advocate for them, and because the advocacy process frustrated the school targeted the kid again, so double punishment for this. Children reported withdrawal of disability accommodations that were implemented in prior school years. So you had a disability, it's documented, you got services, you get suspended, someone advocates for you, school withdraws your accommodations, which means that you're failing now because you need those accommodations. Many of these students that I interviewed, their grades tanked because they weren't getting the accommodations. And then the emergence of barriers to graduation following their parents or activist advocacy efforts. Many schools in the South, they have two diploma tracks, one that's leading to higher education and one that just leads to a diploma that you really can't do anything with after you graduate. And many administrators switch children to this necessary and basically useless diploma because they knew that these kids would not have the required classes to be accepted into a university, which would make them on track for this school to prison pipeline initiative. So that's where I will stop and take any questions you have.
Thank you so much,
I
Dr.
have a
Bell.
question if nobody else does, Toy. Sorry.
Yeah, somebody does. I think Representative
Okay.
from Sharon Chung had a question. Then
Sure.
yes, go ahead.
Hi, Toy. This is Sharon Chung. Hi, everybody.
Hey, Rep, you are on here.
It is me. Hello.
All right.
Wow. Thank you.
No, of course. Thank you so much for this presentation. I did you talk about a lot of things that that has really interested me since I've been in the General Assembly. I do want to point out that in the General Assembly, we did pass a bill this past year. So I think it got passed in May, signed into law probably in June or July. What it was is that it prevents local police departments from fining and ticketing students because we found that there was a huge, if for minor things like vaping, minor fights, things like that, because we found that a lot of municipalities were seeing it as a sort of, to put it in not a great term, but it was like a sort of cash cow that they could find that we can find students for these minor things. We can make a lot of money off of it, which was then, of course, like a lot of the things you've talked about, like is really putting an unfair burden on a lot of students of color, their parents, because then they have to go to court or whatever and fight these fines. So this was a bill that I really did try to push for, and we were able to pass that. So I don't know totally when it's going into effect. I do know, I think it was Senate Bill 1519, if anybody wants to look into that. But it's something that I know a lot of the things that you talked about, Charles, in your presentation is, these things that I think that we're trying to make baby steps and trying to fix here in the state. Another thing that I have, when we were talking about this bill, one thing that I learned about was the fact that here in Bloomington Normal, between Unit 5 and District 87, we really do have a model school resource officer program, from what I've heard, because they're always they haven't done any of these ticketing and fining, as far as I understand. They've always tried to sort of do alternative, how do I explain it? Just sort of like different, instead of like doing suspensions and fining and ticketing students, finding alternative ways to sort of like help redirect students. That's my understanding, that they've been doing it here and has been held up to sort of like model SRO program standard.
As a parent,
yes,
Ms. Chung, I can tell you I have been very pleased overall with I have kids that went through Bloomington Junior High, and our youngest are now at the high school. Our oldest graduated. I've been very, very impressed with the resource officers, and that was actually one of the things I was going to ask Dr. Bell about. It does not seem like, I mean, I'm not in the school, but I was very curious as to just having officers in the school, how that would appear. But from what I have seen from the students, especially at the junior high, they loved Officer Mack. And
Yep.
he would
He
go
retired
out.
today. He retired today.
I know. His next person has big shoes to fill, but he would be engaging with the students and joking around with them, like all students. It was really nice to see, and I felt like that was a small seed of helping people see that not all police officers are bad and that there are good ones. And so I feel like it has done well so far, but that's just what little I've seen just going in and out of the schools.
I agree as well. I have an eighth grader at Bloomington Junior High. So, I've been aware of, the program that they have there, have gotten to know Officer Matt quite a bit over the past couple of years. But yes, his new replacement has big shoes to fill. But anyway, that's sort of my input. I'm sorry to sort of talk a whole bunch right now, but just sort of giving you the perspective of, from what I understand of what's happening here, how we're also trying to help at the state level. And of course, we're happy to entertain any sort of other ideas that any of you here on the call might have. But thank you so much.
Thanks, Rev Chung. Thank you for coming. Appreciate it.
Of course, it's great to see you, Toy. I also met your daughter. When was it? Sometime earlier this fall. She was so
Yeah,
great.
she told me. Yeah. Go ahead, Heather. Are you on mute, Heather?
Ms. Chung actually spoke on a little bit of what I was, a question I had, and I felt better about it. But I'm curious, okay, so while I am not a woman of color, some of the things that you spoke about specifically to the suspension, Dr. Bell, resonated with me because last year my daughter was at a school that was specifically created for kids who are at risk or have been inpatient mental health. I was very involved in the school. I ended up being there a lot because of her mental health. However, there was one, like they wanted to suspend her for having a vape because they wanted her. And I said, well, they said it's around her waistband. I said, well, could it be the buttons on jeans? And they're like, no, it doesn't go off that. So a day I was there taking pictures, they said, well, we think your daughter has a vape. I said, okay, well, I'm here. Let's do this. Let's go up there. If it's somewhere that you can't check, I can. I'm her mom. Long story short, they wanted her. It went off, and it was in her sweatshirt. So she took her sweatshirt off, wanded the sweatshirt, and the sweatshirt itself went off, even though there was nothing, like the principal patted down, nothing in there. So how much more difficult is it for other kids who are in that same situation and their parents can't come and do that? But then shortly thereafter, they accused her of plagiarizing. And I said, well, what are you talking about? And my daughter admitted, well, I use AI to like kind of help formulate my thoughts. And they were going off of a rough draft that hadn't even been turned in. It took me literally an hour of advocating for her, I said, I put this through different, plagiarism resources. I literally can come up with maybe 3%, which is less than a normal paper that is 100% written by a student. But they would not give me what they used to come up with this. And I 100% felt like she was being targeted because I advocated so fiercely. And that is as a white woman who, I have a flexible job. I'm able to be there. And so you bringing up that, if things like, had I not been, you're right, she would have been suspended. So how many more people fall into that for so many different reasons? So thank you so much for bringing that to light. As far as school resource officers, how do you feel? Like you mentioned that children don't feel safe if there's an officer in the school, especially if you are in a marginalized community. What is your experience, if you had any, with the resource officers we have here in Bloomington Normal?
So that's a really good question. And I think that this issue on school resource officers is geographic based. So you could go to a district like Bloomington, for example, and students may report a strong relationship with school guards and love. And you can go to a district that's, 20 miles away and it could be very different response. So it really just depends on where you are and that relationship. And I think what I've learned here, as someone who's gone across the country, is that there is a culture of privileging relationships, relationship building with students that unfortunately you just don't see everywhere. Unfortunately, it's not there back in Michigan where I live. So I'll just give you this as an example. When I moved here, I'd already completed a study in Michigan, and I thought when I expanded my research here that I would have a hard time getting into the schools here, and it was the exact opposite. I was able to get into the schools here with no problem. When I went back home to get into the neighboring districts, I could not get in the door because they were very familiar with my work and they knew that they were doing things that they should not be doing. And that really is telling to me that I was able to come to Bloomington, was embraced. There were administrators looking for solutions and willing to undergo scrutiny. Whereas back home, and I'll put this on in quotes, there was an administrator who told me, "We know we have ongoing school discipline and racial issues in our school district, and we do not want you anywhere near our schools." That was the quote that I was given. So, yeah, you have different experiences. I will also say that students' opinions and parents' opinions at times conflicted, depending on the area. Some parents were really concerned about creating a barrier between the school and potential threats in the community, people walking into the school unauthorized, students leaving the school unauthorized, students bringing in weapons into the school, whereas some students reported that, hey, I'm not comfortable in this environment because I feel like somebody's always watching me. So,
I
Thanks, Doc.
appreciate
Appreciate
that
that.
insight. Yeah, I do too. And I like as a parent, hearing you say that, you didn't have any problems getting into the schools really helps me feel better about what we're doing with the Reentry Council and the direction we're going because I mean, from what it sounds like, not necessarily like obviously they're law enforcement officers, but that gives me hope that, you know, it'll be easier for us than it might be for other communities to do what we're going to do, what we're doing. So I appreciate that very much. And I'm going to have to run out to the school and tell the officers thank you now. So
Anybody else have any questions for
Yeah, I have a question.
Dr. Bell?
Dr. Bell, have you expanded your research into elementary school? I recently read a book called Slow Violence.
Yes.
About the emotional abuse that kids get in the classroom. And I thought of years ago when my son was in elementary school here, one of his friends had one detention and was then banned from coming to the graduation party for one detention. And my son was extremely upset about it. And my son, even at that point in time, in like fifth grade or sixth grade, asked me, is this because he's Black? And so one of the points that's made in the book Slow Violence is, if we were as a nation more concerned about our students' emotional well-being rather than their educational test scores, that things might change. But I also see this in students that I have at Wesleyan, where I've had a student recently, and a year ago, a former football player here who'd been injured. He was from a school district in Chicago. He was Black. He wanted to do his final project in architecture, but he said, and I quote, "I don't think I'm smart enough to do this." And he actually ended up doing the best project in the class. So I'm curious to know if you have expanded this into elementary school in terms of suspensions and detentions, what impact that has on students going forward.
Certainly. And I will say that I've expanded in two ways. So this research, I started at the high school level, expanded to middle school, and then eventually in elementary school. So I've looked into suspensions in that area. I've also expanded beyond suspensions into seclusion and restraint. And what I found in my upcoming book, it will be released in February. It's called No Restraint: Disabled Children and Institutionalized Violence in American Schools. It's absolutely devastating. Um, so I think and I hate to say this, but it's just historical fact. I think we have to be mindful of the fact that students with disabilities were not allowed in public schools as well. And there's a history there as well. So I think that schools are very concerned with ability. They are concerned with students who will reflect positively on the school. And as several school officials have stated in my upcoming book, when students don't possess the potential in their eyes to reflect positively on the school, they don't want to invest in them. They want to discard them and get them out. So that's a process that needs to be addressed. Seclusion and restraint, absolutely devastating, even more so, in my opinion, than suspensions. It also functions as another school to prison pipeline as well, because a lot of these students, because they were being placed in these seclusion rooms that are closets, look like, solitary confinement prison cells, they were eloping from school and begging their parents not to send them back. And in response, the school would call the police on them and tell the police that we have a mentally ill shooter on the loose, which is a horrific description of a child that they've mobilized into this hypervigilant state because they are using these tactics in clear violation of U.S. Department of Education and state and federal laws, very similar to the law that I know Representative Chung has talked about. There's also laws that have criminalized the use of restraint and seclusion in public schools. And the problem is schools aren't following those laws. They're completely violating all of them, and they're using different terms, quiet rooms, calm down rooms. They're evading mandatory reporting requirements that are associated with the terms seclusion, restraint, and out of school suspension. So, for example, if mandatory reporting is associated with out of school suspension, but we call it a kick out, which is what they're doing, then we really don't know how many children are actually out of school. And that's the same thing with restraint and seclusion. So that's happening in elementary school. It's happening in middle school, high school. It is a disaster. So we have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, that's correct. Thanks, Chris, for that question. Anybody else have a question for Dr. Bell?
I have one more. Sorry. Dr. Bell, you mentioned there are schools that are violating this. I don't know. I'm sure in Illinois as well that these laws and orders that have been put in place. How does a parent or a student, how do we report something like that? Do we report it to the school administration that it's happening in, knowing that the administration already knows? Is there a state portal that people could do that? How, if people are experiencing any of this, how can they report it, I guess?
That's a very challenging question in these times, because typically you would report these things to the U.S. Department of Education's OCR, Office of Civil Rights, but it doesn't exist at this point. Even though the office still has a phone, there's nobody there. I know some people who actually are inside, and I've talked to people with the CDC, and there's just no one to even take these complaints at the federal level. The other problem is that the state attorneys generals across the country, and at least 15 of them, have pleaded to the federal government for federal laws to strengthen enforcement on these issues, and Congress has done nothing to protect students. The Keeping All Students Safe Act has been proposed for the last 20 years in Congress, and it's failed every year. So there's just been no concerted effort to keep students safe, prevent the use of restraint, seclusion, protect students from out of school suspensions. I've been leading a national crusade on these issues, and it's just there's just a lot of resistance and fear of teachers unions, and fear of what could happen to you if you go against the use of these tactics, despite how harmful they are, which is quite shocking. So. And I just actually released a paper where parents have actually sued. And the problem with suing which is you would think that would be the avenue. Parents told me that they spent between two and $300,000 suing schools. And in the very few cases where they won, they were forced to sign NDAs so that the reforms would never touch the kids who also were suffering under these horrific abuses. Also, schools retaliated against parents by calling CPS on them, initiating these false complaints with CPS. So parents had to decide if they wanted to go forward with the lawsuit and suffer, these invasions from CPS, sort of weaponizing another state institution against parents. They targeted children in the district. They targeted spouses that were employed in the district. It really showed me that schools are not these very friendly and organized institutions that we think they are. If you think about this on the surface, schools have an incentive to protect their image. No one wants to send their kid to a bad school or violent school. And before you enroll your kid in a school, most parents are actually online searching for these kind of incidents. So that means schools have an incentive to hide them from parents. So they never want these things to make the news. They want to cover them up. And I think that is a really big problem. So unfortunately, I think it takes coalitions like this organization. It takes coalitions across the country. I just actually gave a keynote at another coalition. It takes parents, advocates, and attorneys coming together, legislators coming together to make a difference in these issues. And I'm looking forward to continuing a relationship with you guys because a lot of the um, challenges that I'm seeing in my work are absolutely horrific. So we need a lot of work and a lot of legislative challenges on these issues. And I will say that as I've traveled across the country, I think Illinois, matter of fact, I know Illinois is a leader in these reforms. I've been really impressed living here in Illinois and looking at what's coming out, the legislation, the commitment to when we find something that's wrong, we correct it. Very similar to the ticketing initiative. Jody Cohan cracked that story, and I've been following her reporting for a number of years. And it's like, soon as the ticketing issue came out, there's a bill to solve it. And that's just not the case everywhere. A lot of these initiatives, they go on for years, decades, and no one wants to do anything about it. I've written legislation, I've proposed it, and there are people who are just like, nope, we don't want to even see this. We don't want to reform. We like things the way that they are. And I'm glad to see that Illinois is really leading the charge in addressing some of these horrific abuses.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So in short, what you're saying is there's really no way to report this until a lot of people take it up as an issue that is not just about the kids, but it's a larger issue.
Yeah. It's unfortunate.
We'll put that on our agenda, Toy.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we're already doing some work here in the community. We recently started a chapter here called the Fully Free Bloomington Normal chapter, where we're going to be addressing a lot of these issues. So some individuals have received information regarding the Fully Free chapter that we just started here through the org I work for called the Illinois Coalition to End Permanent Punishment. And so those are a lot of things we're going to be bringing forth here in our community. We just passed a really big expansion bill around called the Clean Slate. And what this Clean Slate expansion bill is, it also help individuals regain their life after incarceration. And so we're going to be bringing some things ahead of us. So be tuned. Thank you, Dr. Bell. Appreciate it. I know it's 11 minutes after the hour. If anybody have anything they want to connect with Dr. Bell, get with Heather, send Heather email. If you don't have her email, she'll put it in the chat. If you don't have Dr. Bell information, she can also send you his email, his personal email and his work email.
I'll put it right in the chat.
So there is a few people that put their information in there, and I did make note of that. So as long as Dr. Bell is okay with that, I will connect them. And There's some people that were interested in the presentation, having a copy of the presentation. I don't know if that is, copyrighted or private to you, Dr. Bell, but there are a few people that were interested in having a copy of that if you're willing to share it.
Sure. Send me an email. I'll send it. Yeah.
Perfect.
Absolutely. Once again, thank everybody for coming. Thank you, Representative Chung, for coming. We appreciate you, and being tuned for next month.
Thank you so much.
Happy holidays,
everybody.
everyone.
Thank you very much.